The table. Real estate developers are ready to dive in. Airlines, plenty of big U.S. companies stand to benefit if the island paradise, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, reopens its markets.
Yeah, think about ADM. They are dying to get in. All the food companies, Nestle's, they all want to get in there because they see a potential market. So how much would a free Cuba stimulate our economy? Let's ask our Fox panel about it, including Pat Powell from Powell Financial, Victoria Barrett from Forbes, Gary Kaltbaum of GaryK.com, and Peter Schiff, author of Crash Proof. The potential, Pat Powell, of Cuba is enormous. It was not for nothing that when all those Cubans moved to Miami boomed the way it did. They are natural entrepreneurs who've had a cap on their entrepreneurial powers for about 50 years. They're just waiting for that cap to be lifted.
Sure, they are. I do think, though, you'll have temporary dislocations, sort of like when the wall came down between East and West Germany, that you had a tremendous problem in the short run, but in the long run, it's an incredibly positive thing. I think it's more positive for Cuba than it is for the United States because money will initially flow there, but I also think it provides another source of educated and less expensive labor for companies, and so you might find pharmaceutical companies might want to go down there.
Educated labor as well.
Labor,
I mean, Intel could move down there tomorrow.
Absolutely. So I think it's a win-win for everybody involved, although I think it's going to take a little bit longer to get going.
I was going to say, Gary Kaltbaum, are we kind of getting ahead of ourselves here that it may take quite some time? Plus, his brother, Raul, is still going to be in charge, and they're probably of the same mentality, are they not?
Yeah, Liz, this is simply a transfer of power from one dictator to the next. Raul's been running the country with Fidel for the last 50 years. I really do not think much changes. And when you think about it, they are dictators. And what happens if the economy does open up and helps out their people? It takes away power from them, and that's what a dictator does not want. So, look, we want to be hopeful. We'd love to open up the economy there, but I just don't think it's happening in the near term and as quickly as some people think.
Well, Victoria, I agree partially with what Gary says. The fact that indeed Raul was actually executing people right after the revolution. He was pulling the trigger. So he is a nasty piece of work. At the same time, I cannot overemphasize enough the entrepreneurial capacity of the Cubans in Cuba.
Sure.
When I was down there, I mean, every single Cuban had some little operation going in the back room that they were trying to hide from the local police. They managed to do so. Yeah. So all they need is just a little encouragement to get that moving.
Yeah, you've had to be an entrepreneur in a closet down there because it's practically illegal. But this isn't democracy. The guy in power is the brother of the guy who was in power. But Gary brings up a great point, which is like, was this embargo all that successful? We've had it for 50 years, and for those same 50 years, Fidel Castro has stayed in power. You open up the borders, bring American business in, he loses power. It's probably a sign of a failure of embargoes. That's the real question.
Peter Schiff, let's fast forward to when Raul is not in power anymore, or he has a change of heart and decides he's going to become Democratic, which is highly unlikely, obviously. What starts to soar immediately? What begins to blossom?
I don't know. I mean, we've got some exposure down there. We have some Canadian companies, some Spanish companies that we own that have some hotel interests down in Cuba, some natural resources down there. But I don't really know how it's going to play out. I mean, first of all, you're talking about democracy. I mean, what they really need is capitalism. I mean, the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. I mean, you can see what's going on in China. So what they need is really to restore private property, entrepreneurship, to eliminate government regulation. And, they might get ultimately democracy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their economy is going to thrive unless they can limit the power of government.
Well, Gary Kaltbaum, that's an interesting point, and clearly China has found a way to surmount the communist power that dictates over the people and introduce capitalism. Raul, for all of my hesitations about him, claims that that's what he wants to do. That's what he's telling the folks, and clearly there have been times, moments in the past 10 years when he's tried to do that.
Well, look, the proof will be in the pudding, as they say, whether something does get done. Look, Peter is right, but to affect change, I don't think it's going to come from the government. To affect change, I think the people need to stand up and say we want change and start demonstrating and do something about it. Until that happens, I think it's going to be more of the same. I do not think much gets done. Listen, if something gets done, we'll fly in there, we'll put some hotels. I don't think it's the biggest deal to our economy, though, in the long run, but I would love to see it happen.
Pat?
Gary's right. It's a bigger deal for Cuba than it is for us. And I would disagree on some points. I think that the Cuban dictators would absolutely love to get some money in there. They have been really in trouble ever since the Russians have fallen apart.
Look at the Chinese, Victoria. Once they, as communists, got a taste of entrepreneurial attitude and certainly the money that comes in from capitalism, they're loving it. Could we see some type of sort of bifurcated form of it like we see in China?
I think we would probably have to. You know, being in America, it's so easy to say, let people vote and capitalism will flourish. But what China is showing us is that you probably do need some government involvement along the way to make things happen. But the opportunity is huge. You know, Cuba's infrastructure is ailing. That's an opportunity for U.S. companies and for local citizens there to really thrive.
Okay. And they still make great mojitos and have wonderful cigars. We don't want to forget them either.
I'll tell you something.
Yeah, we get cigars.
Watch.
That's big.
What should we watch quickly in 5 seconds?
Watch Venezuela. They subsidize Cuba, and I'm not so sure they're as friendly to Raul as they are with Fidel.
Very good point. Well, dueling Democrats in a president.